Chapter 23. The Last Batch of Brownies. Dr. Breed was mistaken about at least one thing. There was such a thing as Ice 9. And Ice 9 was on Earth. Ice 9 was the last gift Felix Honecker created for mankind before going to his just reward. He did it without anyone's realizing what he was doing. He did it without leaving records of what he'd done. True, elaborate apparatus was necessary in the act of creation, but it already existed in the research laboratory. Dr. Honecker had only to go calling on laboratory neighbors, borrowing this and that, making a winsome neighborhood nuisance of himself, until, so to speak, he had baked his last batch of brownies. He made a chip of Ice 9. It was blue-white. It had a melting point of 114.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Felix Honecker had put the chip in a little bottle, and he put the bottle in his pocket, and he had gone to his cottage on Cape Cod with his 3 children, there intending to celebrate Christmas. Angela had been 34. Frank had been 24. Little Newt had been 18. The old man had died on Christmas Eve, having told only his children about Ice 9. His children had divided the Ice 9 among themselves. Chapter 24. What a Wampeter is. Which brings me to the Bokononist concept of a Wampeter. A Wampeter is the pivot of a cuirass. No cuirass is without a Wampeter, Bokonon tells us, just as no wheel is without a hub. Anything can be a Wampeter. A tree, a rock, an animal, an idea, a book, a melody, the Holy Grail. Whatever it is, the members of its cuirass revolve about it in the majestic chaos of a spiral nebula. The orbits of the members of a cuirass about their common Wampeter are spiritual orbits, naturally. It is souls, and not bodies, that revolve. As Bokonon invites us to sing, around and around and around we spin, with feet of lead and wings of tin. And Wampeters come and Wampeters go, Bokonon tells us. At any given time, a cuirass actually has 2 Wampeters, one waxing in importance, one waning. And I am almost certain that while I was talking to Dr. Breed in Ilium, the Wampeter of my cuirass that was just coming into bloom was that crystalline form of water, that blue-white gem, that seed of doom called Ice 9. While I was talking to Dr. Breed in Ilium, Angela, Franklin, and Newton Honecker had in their possession seeds of Ice 9. Seeds grown from their father's seed. Chips, in a matter of speaking, off the old block. What was to become of those 3 chips was, I am convinced, a principal concern of my cuirass. Chapter 25. The main thing about Dr. Honecker. So much, for now, for the Wampeter of my cuirass. After my unpleasant interview with Dr. Breed in the research laboratory of the General Forge and Foundry Company, I was put into the hands of Miss Faust. Her orders were to show me the door. I prevailed upon her, however, to show me the laboratory of the late Dr. Honecker first. En route, I asked her how well she had known Dr. Honecker. She gave me a frank and interesting reply, and a piquant smile to go with it. I don't think he was knowable. I mean, when most people talk about knowing somebody a lot or a little, they're talking about secrets they've been told or haven't been told. They're talking about intimate things, family things, love things. That nice old lady said to me. Dr. Honecker had all those things in his life, the way every living person has to. but they weren't the main things with him. What were the main things? I asked her. Dr. Breed keeps telling me the main thing with Dr. Honecker was truth. You don't seem to agree. I don't know whether I agree or not. I just have trouble understanding how truth, all by itself, could be enough for a person. Miss Faust was ripe for Bokononism. Chapter 26. What God is. Did you ever talk to Dr. Honecker? I asked Miss Faust. Oh, certainly. I talked to him a lot. Do any conversations stick in your mind? There was one where he bet I couldn't tell him anything that was absolutely true. So I said to him, God is love. And what did he say? He said, what is God? What is love? Uh, but God really is love, you know, said Miss Faust. No matter what Dr. Honecker said. Chapter 27. Men from Mars. The room that had been the laboratory of Dr. Felix Honecker was on the 6th floor, the top floor of the building. A purple cord had been stretched across the doorway, and a brass plate on the wall explained why the room was sacred. In this room, Dr. Felix Honecker, Nobel laureate in physics, spent the last 28 years of his life. Where he was, there was the frontier of knowledge. The importance of this one man in the history of mankind is incalculable. Miss Faust offered to unshackle the purple cord for me so that I might go inside and traffic more intimately with whatever ghosts were there. I accepted. It's just as he left it, she said, except that there were rubber bands all over one counter. Rubber bands? Don't ask me what for. Don't ask me what any of all this is for. The old man had left the laboratory a mess. What engaged my attention at once was the quantity of cheap toys lying around. Oops. There was a paper kite with a broken spine. There was a toy gyroscope wound with string, ready to whir and balance itself. There was a top. There was a bubble pipe. There was a fishbowl with a castle and 2 turtles in it. He loved 10-cent stores, said Miss Faust. I can see he did. Some of his most famous experiments were formed with equipment that cost less than $1. A penny saved is a penny earned. There were numerous pieces of conventional laboratory equipment, too, of course, but they seemed drab accessories to the cheap, gay toys. Dr. Honecker's desk was piled with correspondence. I don't think he ever answered a letter, mused Miss Faust. People had to get him on the telephone or come to see him if they wanted an answer. There was a framed photograph on his desk. Its back was towards me, and I ventured a guess as to whose picture it was. His wife? No. One of his children? No. Himself? No. So I took a look. I found that the picture was of a humble little war memorial in front of a small town courthouse. Part of the memorial was a sign that gave the names of those villagers who had died in various wars, and I thought that the sign must be the reason for the photograph. I could read the names, and I half expected to find the name Honecker among them. It wasn't there. That was one of his hobbies, said Miss Faust. What was? photographing how cannonballs are stacked on different courthouse lawns. Apparently, how they've got them stacked in that picture is very unusual. I see. He was an unusual man. I agree. Maybe in a million years, everybody will be as smart as he was and see things the way he did. But compared with the average person of today, he was as different as a man from Mars. Maybe he really was a Martian, I suggested. That would certainly go a long way toward explaining his 3 strange kids. Chapter 28. Mayonnaise. While Miss Faust and I waited for an elevator to take us to the first floor, Miss Faust said she hoped the elevator that came would not be number 5. Before I could ask her why this was a reasonable wish, number 5 arrived. Its operator was a small and ancient Negro whose name was Lyman Enders Knowles. Knowles was insane, I'm almost sure, offensively so, in that he grabbed his own behind and cried, "Yes, yes," whenever he felt that he'd made a point. "Hello, fellow anthropoids and lily pads and paddle wheels," he said to Miss Faust and me. "Yes, yes." "First floor, please," said Miss Faust coldly. All Knowles had to do to close the door and get us to the first floor was to press a button. But he wasn't going to do that yet. He wasn't going to do it, maybe, for years. "Man told me," he said, "that these here elevators was Mayan architecture. I never knew that till today. And I says to him, 'What's that make me? Mayonnaise?' 'Yes, yes.' And while he was thinking that over, I hit him with a question that straightened him up and made him think twice as hard. 'Yes, yes.'" "Could we please go down, Mr. Knowles?" begged Miss Faust. "I said to him," said Knowles, "'This here's a research laboratory.' Research means look again, don't it? Means they're looking for something new they found once and it got away somehow. And now they got to research for it? How come they got to build a building like this with mayonnaise elevators and all and fill it with all these crazy people? What is it they're trying to find again? Who lost what? Yes, yes." "That's very interesting," sighed Miss Faust. "Now, could we go down?" "Only way we can go is down," barked Knowles. "This here's the top. You asked me to go up, and wouldn't be a thing I could do for you." "Yes, yes." "So let's go down," said Miss Faust. "Very soon now. This gentleman here been paying respects to Dr. Hoenicker?" "Yes," I said. "Did you know him?" "Intimately," he said. "You know what I said when he died?" "No." "I said, 'Dr. Hoenicker, he ain't dead.'" "Oh?" "Just entered a new dimension.' Yes, yes." He punched a button and down we went. "Did you know the Hoenicker children?" I asked him. "Babies full of rabies," he said. "Yes, yes." Chapter 29. Gone but not forgotten. There was one more thing I wanted to do in Ilium. I wanted to get a photograph of the old man's tomb. So I went back to my room, found Sandra gone, picked up my camera, and hired a cab. Sleet was still coming down, acid and gray. I thought the old man's tombstone and all that sleet might photograph pretty well. Might even make a good picture for the jacket of the day the world ended. The custodian at the cemetery gate told me how to find the Hoenicker burial plot. "Can't miss it," he said. "It's got the biggest marker in the place." He did not lie. The marker was an alabaster phallus, 20 feet high and 3 feet thick. It was plastered with sleet. By God, I exclaimed, getting out of the cab with my camera. How's that for a suitable memorial to a father of the atom bomb? I laughed. I asked the driver if he'd mind standing by the monument in order to give some idea of scale. And then I asked him to wipe away some of the sleet so the name of the deceased would show. He did so. And there on the shaft, in letters 6 inches high, "So help me God," was the word, Mother. Chapter 30. Only Sleeping. "Mother?" asked the driver incredulously. I wiped away more sleet and uncovered this poem. "Mother, Mother, how I pray for you to guard us every day." Angela Honecker. And under this poem was yet another. "You are not dead, but only sleeping. We should smile and stop our weeping." Franklin Honecker. And underneath this, inset in the shaft, was a square of cement bearing the imprint of an infant's hand. Beneath the imprint were the words, "Baby Newt." "If that's Mother," said the driver, "what in the hell could they have raised over Father?" He made an obscene suggestion as to what the appropriate marker might be. We found Father close by. His memorial, as specified in his will, I later discovered, was a marble cube 40 centimeters on each side. "Father," it said. Chapter 31. Another Breed. As we were leaving the cemetery, the driver of the cab worried about the condition of his own mother's grave. He asked if I would mind taking a short detour to look at it. It was a pathetic little stone that marked his mother. Not that it mattered. And the driver asked me if I would mind another brief detour, this time to a tombstone salesman across the street from the cemetery. I wasn't a Bokanonist then, so I agreed with some peevishness. As a Bokanonist, of course, I would have agreed gaily to go anywhere anyone suggested. As Bokanon says, peculiar travel suggestions are dancing lessons from God. The name of the tombstone establishment was Avram Breed and Sons. As the driver talked to the salesman, I wandered among the monuments. Blank monuments. Monuments in memory of nothing so far. I found a little institutional joke in the showroom. Over a stone angel hung mistletoe. Cedar boughs were heaped on her pedestal. Around her marble throat was a necklace of Christmas tree lamps. "How much for her?" I asked the salesman. "Not for sale. She's 100 years old. My great-grandfather, Avram Breed, carved her." "This business is that old?" "That's right." "And you're a Breed?" "Fourth generation in this location." "Any relation to Dr. Asa Breed, the director of the research laboratory?" "His brother." His He said his name was Marvin Breed. "It's a small world," I observed. "When you put it in a cemetery, it is." Marvin Breed was sleek and vulgar, and a smart and sentimental man. Chapter 32. Dynamite Money. "I just came from your brother's office. I'm a writer. I was interviewing him about Dr. Honecker," I said to Marvin Breed. "There was one queer son of a bitch." "Not my brother. I mean Honecker." "Did you sell him that monument for his wife?" "I sold his kids that. He didn't have anything to do with it. He never got around to putting any kind of marker on her grave. And then, after she'd been dead for a year or more, Honecker's 3 kids came in here. The big tall girl, the boy, the little baby. They wanted the biggest stone money could buy, and the 2 older ones had poems they'd written. They wanted the poems on that stone. You can laugh at that stone if you want to, said Marvin Braid. But those kids got more consolation out of that than anything else money could have bought. They used to come and look at it and put flowers on it. I don't know how many times a year. It must have cost a lot. Nobel Prize money bought it. 2 things that money bought. A cottage on Cape Cod and that monument. Dynamite money, I marveled, thinking of the violence of dynamite and the absolute repose of a tombstone and a summer home. What? Nobel invented dynamite. Well, I guess it takes all kinds. Had I been a Bokanonist then, pondering the miraculously intricate chain of events that had brought dynamite money to that particular tombstone company, I might have whispered, busy, busy, busy. Busy, busy, busy is what we Bokanonists whisper whenever we think of how complicated and unpredictable the machinery of life really is. But all I could say as a Christian then was, life sure is funny sometimes. And sometimes it isn't, said Marvin Breed. Chapter 33. An Ungrateful Man. I asked Marvin Breed if he'd known Emily Honecker, the wife of Felix, the mother of Angela, Frank, and Newt, the woman under that monstrous shaft. Know her? His voice turned tragic. Did I know her, mister? Sure, I knew her. I knew Emily. We went to Ilium High School together. We were co-chairmen of the class color committees then. Her father owned the Ilium music store. She could play every musical instrument there was. I fell so hard for her I gave up football and tried to play the violin. And then my big brother Asa came home from spring vacation from MIT, and I made the mistake of introducing him to my best girl. Marvin Breed snapped his fingers. He took her away from me just like that. I smashed out my $75 violin on a big brass knob at the foot of my bed, and I went down to a florist shop and got the kind of box they put a dozen roses in, and I put the busted fiddle in the box, and I sent it to her by Western Union messenger boy. Pretty, was she? Pretty, he echoed. Mister, whenever I see my first lady angel, if God ever sees fit to show me one, it'll be her wings and not her face that'll make my mouth fall open. I've already seen the prettiest face that could ever be. There wasn't a man in Ilium County who wasn't in love with her, secretly or otherwise. She could have had any man she wanted. He spit on his own floor. And she had to go and marry that little Dutch son of a bitch. She was engaged to my brother, and then that sneaky little bastard hit town. Marvin Breed snapped his fingers again. He took her away from my big brother like that. I suppose it's high treason and ungrateful and ignorant and backward and anti-intellectual to call a dead man as famous as Felix Honecker a son of a bitch. I know all about how harmless and gentle and dreamy he was supposed to be, how he'd never hurt a fly, how he didn't care about money and power and fancy clothes and automobiles and things, and how he wasn't like the rest of us, how he was better than the rest of us, how he was so innocent he was practically a Jesus, except for the Son of God part. Marvin Breed felt it was unnecessary to complete his thought. I had to ask him to do it. But what? He said. But what? He went to a window looking out at the cemetery gate. But what? He murmured at the gate, and the sleet and the Honecker shaft could be dimly seen. But, he said. But how the hell innocent is a man who helps makes a thing like an atomic bomb? And how can you say a man had a good mind when he couldn't even bother to do anything when the best-hearted, most beautiful woman in the world, his own wife, was dying for lack of love and understanding? He shuddered. Sometimes I wonder if he wasn't born dead. I never met a man who was less interested in the living. Sometimes I think that's the trouble with the world. Too many people in high places who are stone cold dead. Chapter 34. Vendite. It was in the tombstone sales room that I had my first vendite. I spoke an honest word, meaning a sudden, very personal shove in the direction of Bokononism, in the direction of believing that God Almighty knew all about me, after all, that God Almighty had some pretty elaborate plans for me. The vendite had to do with the stone angel under the mistletoe. The cab driver had gotten it into his head that he had to have that angel for his mother's grave at any price. Marvin Breed was still staring out the window at the cemetery gate, having just said his piece about Felix Honecker. That little Dutch son of a bitch may have been a modern holy man, he added, but god damn if he ever did anything he didn't want to, and god damn if he didn't get everything he ever wanted. Music, he said. Pardon me? I asked. That's why she married him. She said his mind was tuned to the biggest music there was, the music of the stars. He shook his head. Crap. And then the gate reminded him of the last time he'd seen Frank Honecker, the model maker, the tormentor of bugs and jars. Frank, he said. What about him? Last I saw that poor, queer kid was when he came out through that cemetery gate. His father's funeral's still going on. The old man wasn't underground yet, and through that gate came Frank. He raised his thumb at the first car that came by. It was a new Pontiac with a Florida license plate. It stopped. Frank got in it, and that was the last anybody in Ilium ever saw him. I hear he's wanted by the police. That was an accident, a freak. Frank wasn't any criminal. He didn't have that kind of nerve. The only work he was any good at was model making. The only job he ever held on to was at Jack's hobby shop, selling models, making models, giving people advice on how to make models. When he cleared out of there, went to Florida, he got a job at a model shop in Sarasota. Turned out the model shop was a front for a ring that stole Cadillacs, ran 'em on board old LSTs, and shipped 'em to Cuba. That's how Frank got balled up and all that. I expect the reason the cops haven't found him is he's dead. He just heard too much while sticking turrets on the battleship Missouri with Ducko cement. Where's Newt now, do you know? Guess he's with his sister in Indianapolis. Last I heard, he got mixed up with that Russian midget and flunked out of pre-med at Cornell. Can you imagine a midget trying to become a doctor? And in that same miserable family, there's that great big gawky girl, over 6 feet tall. That man who's so famous for having a great mind, he pulled that girl out of high school in her sophomore year, so he could go on having some woman take care of him. All she had going for her was the clarinet she'd been playing in Ilium High School's band, the Marching Hundred. After she left school, said Breed, nobody ever asked her out. She didn't have any friends, and the old man never even thought to give her any money to go anywhere. You know what she used to do? Nope. Every so often at night, she'd lock herself in her room, and she'd play records, and she'd play along with the records on her clarinet. The miracle of this age, as far as I'm concerned, is that woman never got herself a husband. How much do you want for this angel? Asked the cab driver. I told you, it's not for sale. I don't suppose there's anybody around who can do that kind of stone cutting anymore, I observed. I got a nephew who can, said Breed. Ace's boy. He was all set to be a heaping big research scientist. And then they dropped a bomb on Hiroshima, and the kid quit. And he got drunk, and he came out here. And he told me he wanted to go to work cutting stone. He works here now? He's a sculptor in Rome. If somebody offered you enough, said the driver, you'd take it, wouldn't you? Might. It would take a lot of money. Where would you put the name on a thing like that? Asked the driver. There's already a name on it, on the pedestal. We couldn't see the name because of the boffs banged against the pedestal. It was never called for? I wanted to know. It was never paid for. The way the story goes, this German immigrant was on his way west with his wife, and she died here in Ilium. So he ordered this angel to be put up over her, and he showed my great-grandfather he had the cash to pay for it. But then he was robbed. Somebody took practically every cent he had. All he had left in this world was some land he'd bought in Indiana, land he'd never seen. So he moved on, said he'd be back later to pay for the angel. But he never came back? I asked. Nope. Marvin Breed nudged some of the boffs aside with his toe, so that we could see the raised letters on the pedestal. There was a last name written there. There's a screwy name for you, he said. If that immigrant had any descendants, I expect they Americanized that name. They're probably Jones or Black or Thompson now. There you're wrong, I murmured. The room seemed to tip, and its walls and ceiling and floor were transformed momentarily into the mouths of many tunnels, tunnels leading in all directions through time. I had a Bokononist vision of the unity in every second of all time, and all wandering mankind, all wandering womankind, all wandering children. There you're wrong, I said, when the vision was gone. You know some people by that name? Yeah. The name was my last name, too.